So in today's episode we're going to be looking at some sewing machine tips and tricks to help you with your sewing projects. First of all, I'm going to take you through sewing machine setup as well as thread tension between the top thread and the bottom thread. I'm also going to show you how I sew some of the pockets on this particular bag, as well as how to install some zips onto these pockets. I'm also going to show you how to make a turned corner tote bag, and finally we'll finish with how you bag out your bag by turning it the right way out, and you'll be left with a finished bag. So I'm here and I have all of my fabric pieces cut out that I need to make the bag. Full disclosure, I have been working on this prototype for about 2 or 3 weeks now. I've tried many different pocket designs for the front pockets on this tote bag. My original design was to have 2 box pockets on the front panel of the bag. I tried this many times, I got very frustrated, and the finished product just didn't look as good as I'd want it to. So I tested out a flat pocket design on the different colorway of the tote bag, and that came out looking a little bit like this. So instead of the 2 pockets on the front, we have this one pocket here with a waterproof zip, and it's got a nylon lining there. It's not perfect. I would have liked to have had those 2 pockets on the front, but if it doesn't look good, what's the point in doing it? Okay, so let's start with threading your sewing machine. So most industrial sewing machines will have a tree at the back of the sewing machine like this one. This enables you to run 2 spools of thread at the same time. One will be feeding your sewing machine here, and another one will be feeding your bobbin threader, which is over here. The bobbin threader essentially takes movement from the belt of the sewing machine and threads a new bobbin whilst you're sewing, so that when the bobbin that you've already got loaded in your machine runs out, you've got another full one ready to go over here. So the first step is to install your thread onto your thread tree at the back there. Easy peasy. And then mostly thread through the little eyelet at the top here and back down. Now also machine threading technique is different. What I suggest is you use the instruction manual that came with your sewing machine. If like me you bought your sewing machine second hand and maybe it didn't come with the instruction manual, I'm sure with a bit of Google foo you can probably find a suitable instruction manual online that'll teach you how to properly thread your sewing machine. Nevertheless, I'm going to just show you now how I thread this particular machine. This is very hard to do with one hand. Thread it through this bit, wrap it around that bit. This part right here is what creates tension on your top thread. So there's these 2 pressure plates that are controlled using this spring, and adjusting the spring using this screw alters the top thread tension. So you want to pull the thread through those plates and pull it tight. My machine has a little control there, has to go through there, up around this bit, and then through this top eyelet here. Back down the other side, through the thread guide at the bottom here, through this little hole above the needle. Okay, now I want to show you an indispensable tool that I use every day when setting up my sewing machine. It is this little tiny piece of metal. It's just called a needle threader. It just makes getting the thread through the eyelet of the needle so much easier. How you do this is you thread this little wire part here through the eyelet of the needle, then you take your end of your thread, pass it through that little wire piece and pull it, and there you have it. Threaded sewing machine. Next thing I want to show you is a bobbin. Now a bobbin is what sends the thread up through the bottom of the sewing machine, and it's met by the needle and it's pulled up, and that's how you get your stitch on your fabric. It's essentially a tiny little wheel. You have to fill this up with thread and then install it into the bobbin casing underneath your machine. If you're like me and you're lucky and you have an industrial machine like this with the double tree at the back here, you can use another roll of thread to feed your bobbin whilst you're sewing. Mess of threads. Okay, so you can see here my bobbin feed setup. Thread runs through there, down to here. At the back here we have another tension plate with the spring, and you run the thread through that tension plate and then through one of the holes on the side of your bobbin. This little lever here pushes this jockey wheel up against the belt that drives the machine, and what happens is as the bobbin fills up, the thread pushes back against this lever here, and when the bobbin is full it'll pop back like that and it won't take any more thread onto the bobbin. I'll just show you how to get it started. I like to get it going before I start sewing. Okay, once you've got your bobbin filled, like this one here, you're going to want to take your bobbin casing. It's just a small piece of machinery that helps the top thread hook onto the bottom, and you want to install the bobbin into it. Usually there's a little groove. The thread needs to slide through that groove and up against the tension plate. Again, bobbins here have a tension plate screw just here, so you can control the tension of your bobbin. A good rule of thumb is you should be able to hold it in midair and it won't drop down. If you jangle it, it should slide. So you don't want too much tension, you don't want too little. That is a good base set that I found for heavy canvas. Once you've done that, you're going to want to install your bobbin into the casing underneath the machine. Now, to do this, I'm sure you're familiar with your machine. You should just lift up like this, and underneath here will be where you install the bobbin. So you can see this is the bobbin casing here. There's a clip on the side of the bobbin. Open the clip, jiggle it in, make sure the thread's not caught on anything. I like to put it through down underneath to this gap, and then drop it down. Once you've done that, what you want to do is get this top thread here to catch on to the bottom thread of your bobbin. What I like to do is lightly apply pressure to the pedal of your sewing machine and turn the jockey wheel at the side until the needle goes through underneath and it makes a full turn. And ideally what you want to be able to see is this thread pull at the top of your machine should be at the top right position just before it starts to go back down. And after that, just pull on the thread and eventually a little loop will pop out. Pull on that thread and there you have it. Top and a bottom thread. Once you've got these two threads out of your machine, what you want to do is give a little tug on them independently so you can kind of feel the tension in the two. You want to have about the same amount of tension in the top and bottom thread as a base point to start with. So that feels pretty good to me. I just adjusted my top thread tension slightly just to match the bottom thread. And what I like to do at this point is just grab a scrap piece of fabric and you just want to run a stitch up the fabric just to test your top and bottom thread tensions. So as you can see here is my test piece of fabric. That's the bottom stitch here and this is the top stitch. Now you probably won't be able to see, but I think that's pretty good tension on that. What essentially you want is you want to have even tension, so you want to see the threads going down into the fabric. You don't want to see them lying loosely across the top. They want to be actually impregnated into the fabric. My sewing machine came with this very handy illustration of how to set up your top and bottom thread tension. Okay, now that you've got correct thread tension on your machine, you're feeding a secondary bobbin here if you've got that option, and your machine's all threaded and ready to go. It's time to start stitching. The first thing I want to show you is how to stitch a flush pocket like this onto the front panel of the bag. Let's do it. To make your flush pocket, what you want to do is start with the lining of your pocket. I've got this lovely ripstop nylon here, and on the reversed side you want to mark some lines onto this. Now the first line you want to mark should be halfway and then half an inch further away from halfway down your fabric. So halfway down and another half inch, draw a line there. And then what you want to do is measure another half inch away from that line that you've just drawn and draw another one. It's very hard to see, but I've drawn my two lines here, and the next step, what you want to do is measure 1 inch away from the edge and close these two lines together. Once you've got your rectangle drawn out, what you want to do next is lay your panel that you're attaching the pocket to, and you want to lay your pocket piece over the top. You want to line up this lining fabric onto the panel you're going to be stitching it on. Okay, and once you're happy that it's straight, you want to either pin it or clip it into place. I prefer using these clips. They're really good. They've got a flat edge on the bottom so it moves really well through your sewing machine. Okay, once you've got that clipped into place, what you're going to want to do next is sew around this rectangle that you have drawn. When you're about to sew on your sewing machine, make sure that your threads are hanging out the back like this and they are long enough so that they're not going to get tangled in your piece when you're stitching it. Slide the piece in. What I like to do when lining up here is use the jockey wheel to drop my needle into the corner just so it's about to touch the fabric, and then drop your presser foot and then stitch. Back stitch as always. When you get to the corner, again lift the presser foot, drop the needle into the corner like so, and spin the piece round. Drop the foot again, stitch. Back stitch to finish. Lift the needle to the high point like what we did when we threaded it. Lift the presser foot, pull the piece out and cut the threads. Once you've done that, I like to trim the threads tight and burn the ends. I'm using poly-coated thread, so when you do burn the ends it creates this little tiny ball of melted plastic, and it really helps to seal those threads shut. So trim, leave a little bit of an excess, and then take your trusty lighter and burn off the excess. And now what you want to do is have a little break for some coffee. Okay, once you've had your coffee break, it's time to move on to the next step. So the next step, you want to cut a slit through the middle of this rectangle here, and you want to leave 1/4 of an inch at each end here and cut a little V to meet up with that line. You want to cut through both sides of the fabric, the lining and the main panel. Once you've cut your slit here, you should have little triangles at the end and a slit like this. What you want to do, push the pocket through to the other side. What I find helps, especially if you've got quite thick fabric like I do, is fold the canvas on the front side, the side where your pocket isn't, so you have a nice clean edge. Once you've done that, really press down on those pockets. You want to get the back side with the lining here, you want to get this as flush as possible. Okay, once you've got that, you'll have this little letterbox. For the next step, you want to grab your zip. For these bags, I'm using these waterproof zips. They have this rubber membrane across the top that helps keep the water out. I like the zippers on my bag to go from right to left. What you want to do is line your zipper up in the pocket. It can take a while to get right. Once you've got it centered, or as centered as it can be, you want to pin it in place. Okay, once you've got it clipped or pinned into place, what you want to do is run a top stitch around this letterbox opening on the front. I should say at this point that you want to keep the lining of your pocket flat against the back of the piece. When sewing zips, it can get quite tricky to pass around the actual zipper. Here's a little tip to avoid that. Okay, once you get to this stage in sewing your zipper, a good thing to do is to drop your needle into the piece, lift your presser foot and unzip your zipper. This way you can get a really nice finish without having to go round the actual zipper. Always be careful when you're sewing zips, when you're actually sewing over the zip itself. You want to go quite slowly as to avoid breaking a needle. Back stitch to finish it off, lift the presser foot, pull your piece away. Again, we're going to trim the threads and burn them down. This time, however, because I'm working on an outer side, you might call it the right way side, or a side that's going to be visible when the bag is actually a bag, I find that burning the fabric leaves this big glob of horrible brown plastic on the outside of the bag. It's not very pleasing. So for the front side, you want to trim these fabrics, these threads, as close to the material as possible, and then on the back side we're going to burn the excess. Okay, so you can see here that I have the zip on the bag like this. You can see through to the lining underneath. Okay, once you've got your zipper all done like this, what you want to do then is trim off the excess of your zipper here. I like to leave it on until it's actually onto the bag. Just gives you a bit more wiggle room to play with. So a nice sharp pair of seamstress scissors. Cut it to about 1/4 inch away from that seam that you just sewed. Nice and slowly through there. Perfect. And once you've done that, all that's left to do is to just close off this pocket here, and then we have a pocket. Okay, because we stitched this with the larger end of the fabric at the top here, when you fold it down over the zip like so, it should line up fairly well. And then what I like to do is just run clips all the way around the outside and then sew it. Okay, once you've got all your clips in place like so, it's time to sew it. Once you've sewn that, cut off the threads and burn the excess. Be careful with what type of material you're using. As this is nylon, it's essentially made of plastic, so it will melt if the flame comes into contact with the lining fabric. So just be wary when you're burning these threads. So you should be left with something like this. You should have an enclosed pocket on the back, a lovely letterbox zip on the front. You can unzip it, stick your hand in, and you can put things in. Okay, as you can see, I've made the two main panels for my bag. I've added the straps and I've added these front panels with the pocket here on the front one. Now I'm going to show you how I add a zipper and a lining to a tote bag like this. The first thing you want to do when making a zipper is you want to make these small zipper tabs. Now these go at the top of your bag and they stop the zipper. To do this, you just want to take a scrap of fabric like this. Size doesn't really matter as long as it's wider than the zip. You want to fold it in half, like so, unfold it, and then fold these two edges in, like so. Next, you want to get your zipper, and you want to take your zipper tab and place it over the end of the zipper, like so. And then you just want to pin that in place. I'll do that to both ends of the zipper. Once you've got your zipper tabs in place, you just want to stitch them onto the zipper itself. So you want to run a stitch along this line, giving yourself a centimetre seam allowance. Remember, slowly over that zipper. Exactly the same with the other side. I'm going to zip back the zipper a little bit for this side. Once you're done with that, trim and burn the excess. Now what you can do at this stage is trim the end of the zipper tab to the end of your zipper, so everything's nice and flush. And there we have it. There's a zipper ready to go onto our bag. The next thing you want to do is to sew your zipper wrong side up on the right side of your bag. Now, I'm making sure that my zip's both on the right hand side, so this is the back side of the zip and the front side of the fabric. And then you just want to clip into place. Once you've done with that, just run a stitch all the way along here. To keep these top stitches tight when you're taking out your clips, a good rule of thumb is to drop your pin into the fabric before you take the clip out. And once you get to the zip, again, lift the presser foot, unzip the zip, close the presser foot, make sure that your fabric's still lined up, back stitch to lock. Now a lot of people like to do that previous step with the lining attached. I find it a lot easier to attach the lining with a separate stitch afterwards. Just keeps things a bit easier. Instead of holding all these bits of fabric together, you're just holding it once. So you want to take your main panel piece, you want to place that face down, and you want your lining piece face up. You see that my lining piece is a little bit bigger than my main piece, and that is because I've added a seam allowance to it for when we make the lining. So I just want this lining to be overhanging the fabric by a few centimetres on each side. And you want to sew this stitch directly on top of the stitch that you've previously done. Good rule of thumb again is to check your stitch tension every time you make a stitch. It just keeps you on top of the tension and makes sure your bag is going to be held together as strongly as possible. Watch out for the melting fabric. So you want to turn it so that the right side of the fabric is facing you. And you just want to fold this top edge into the zip. And you want to keep it straight and even. I find this easier to do it whilst I'm actually sewing it. I sew it slowly and it helps me control the distance between the end of the fabric and the zip. So once you've folded it over, you just want to run a top stitch across this line to finish off the zipper. Once you've done that, you should have something that looks a little bit like this. You might be able to see the top stitch that I've just stitched here, and the piece will feel a lot flatter. Okay, for the other side of the bag, you want to do exactly the same thing. We want the wrong side of the zip. In this case, the zip will be attached to the main panels and the lining. You want the wrong side of the zip against the right face of the bag. So line it up, clip it in place. You should have something that looks like this. So again, we're just going to run a stitch along here. Okay, once you've attached your zip to your second main panel, you want to add your lining to it. So again, wrong side of the panel that we just sewed, right side of the lining. And I want to line up the edges with my edges, and I'm going to pin in place. Once you've pinned it, again, you're just going to want to run a stitch across this top edge here. So once you've done that last step, you should have something that resembles this flappy monstrosity. You should have your two facing sides together, and then on the inside you should have your two linings facing together. The only thing to do before we finish up the bag is to run that new top stitch along here. When you get to this stage of making bags, especially bigger bags, this one is not so bad, but you're going to have to do a little bit of folding to get it underneath your sewing machine, everything's sitting correctly. Very straightforward, just fold it over, pull it back, there you have it. Okay, why do I keep saying okay every time I start a video? Should we try something different? Alrighty then. Once you've got your bag completed, your zip has been top stitched like so. What you want to do is sew the main parts of the bag together. You want to do this inside out, so the two facing sides go together. Underneath you should have your lining like this, and the two facing sides of the bag together. When you get to the top part of your bag, what you want to do is fold your zipper tab into the bag. Okay, once you've got it all clipped like so, just go ahead and sew around the edge. This is very important. Make sure your zip is open before you start stitching. I almost forgot that. Otherwise, you won't be able to turn the bag back the right way out. Okay, zip's open, bag's all clipped together. Tuck the lining out the way and sew round the outside. Once you have sewn around the outside of your main parts, the next thing we're going to talk about is how to turn these corners. As it currently stands, this would make a fine tote bag. The only issue with it would be is it's very one-dimensional. It's very flat. With a turned corner of a bag, you get a detail like this. It widens the base of the bag, so you have this triangle forming up to the zip at the top. To do it, all you have to do, reach your hand into the bag and go to the corner. What you want to do is fold these two seams together. Now again, the thicker your fabric, the harder this is to do. You just want to line those seams up, nice even triangle. Again, on the other side, just fold those two seams together like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure 90mm across this triangle. Keep moving down the triangle until I get to the point where it's 90mm across and the triangle is even on both sides of the seam here, and then I mark a line across here, and I'm going to do that on both sides. As you can see, I've marked along 90mm onto these flat corners here. I've used a chalk wheel to mark these just so you can see it a little bit better. Right, once you've got that done and your corners are marked like mine, you just want to run a stitch all the way across them and do that on both sides. Your sewing machine might struggle when it gets to that seam in the middle. Just reach your hand around the back of the piece and push and pull at the same time, and it will eventually go over it. Hit that seam quite slowly and your needle should just flow right over it. I like to run a back stitch at the start and end of this. Quite a generous locking stitch because again this is a stress point of the bag. Okay, and then just the same to the other side. Another lock stitch, trim the ends, turn off the excess. Okay, once you've done that, you can leave it how it is, but to finish it off a bit nicer in those seams, you just want to trim this corner that you've just sewn and leave yourself a about a centimetre and a half seam allowance on it. Take your scissors, move your seam allowance. Same with the other side. And then after all this effort, you have this tiny little finger hat. Final step, well, almost the final step. The last stitch you're going to want to do on this bag is finish off the lining. So again, keep that zip open throughout this whole process. What you want to do is take your lining so it's sticking out the top of your bag like this, and then you want to clip around the edge, line up the edges, clip around the edge, and sew. Now it's very important to, when you reach the bottom of this lining, you want to leave a gap in your stitch. So you want to stitch to here and then back stitch and then move to the other side. The reason for that is we're going to use this hole to pull out the whole bag from. So we need to have a hole here. The reason that I made the lining of this bag slightly wider than the actual main body of the bag is so that it overhangs by a little bit at the end. Now this is perfect because you just want to stitch as close as you can to the edge of your original fabric straight into the lining. This way it creates a seamless kind of flow between the lining and the bag itself, and you don't get any unsightly gaps in the lining itself. So once you've sewn your lining together but leaving this little hole at the top here, this is the next step. It's called bagging out. Essentially what you want to do is reach into your bag from that little hole that you left, go right through down to the zip. Now this is how a bag is born, and then you just turn it inside out. Roll the lining down over the top of the bag. This is when you should have left a bit more of a gap in the lining, but it'll go. If it's really not going to go, don't push it too much, because you don't want to snap those threads that you've just put in the lining. You definitely do not want to rip your lining. A bit of thumb work. It's hard to do on camera, sorry. So this way, your lining is right way out and you've got a hidden seam here. So the only thing left to do is to address this big gaping hole that you've left in the seam. Best thing for that to do is just run a top stitch along it, fold in the raw edges so it looks a bit neater, a few clips, and then we just stitch that hole up. Another pro tip, you'll know when your bobbin is about to finish because your bottom thread will start coming out very, very curly. Mine's just started to do it now. I would usually change the bobbin at this point, but I have probably a 10 centimetre long stitch to do, and once that's done, the whole bag will be done. Knowing my luck, the bobbin will run out halfway through this stitch. So you want to start sewing past where you stopped for that hole. You want to make sure that these two stitches run into each other just to really hold the two sides of the lining together. Please, Mr. Bobbin, don't run out on me. If your materials are melting quite quickly when you're burning your threads, a good tip is to leave a little bit more excess on the thread. Set light to it, it'll start to burn down, and then when it meets the fabric at the end, it'll just stop burning and it won't burn the fabric. Once you have followed all of these steps, or whatever steps are applicable to you, it's time to bag out. This is a technical industry term. It essentially means turn it inside out, or the right way out, depending on how you look at it. It's quite a daunting process because if you've done anything wrong, it'll show now. I'm hoping I haven't because I'm on video, that would be very embarrassing. But it's also very exciting because it's the first chance you get to actually see your finished product. The tougher the materials you use, the harder it will be to bag out. And really push your fingers into the turned corner seams that we did so that they get a really nice sharp right angle edge. Another very tricky area is the zipper tabs. Just want to give them a good solid push. Try and get as much of them out as possible. We've got a bag. Right, so I hope you enjoyed this series of videos, me taking you through my design process through to prototyping an actual bag. Hopefully it's been informative, hopefully there's something you can take away from it to help you with your own projects. As you can see, we have the first drawing, the initial drawing that we did in part 1, compared to the finished bag that we have here. The only thing left for me to do is to add the zipper stops that we added on this bag onto this green version here. It takes quite a while. I have to unpick everything and start again, but these are just prototypes. These will not be for sale. And sort out the zipper stops on this one. Again, just unpick it and move them and restitch them. And then I just have to add these little zipper pulls here. They're just made out of orange paracord. I've added them to this one. I really like how they look, so I'm going to add them to this one. I'll do some photography of these bags, and once that's done, I will upload them and they will be available on our web store. That has been a very long day and a very long week, so I'm now off to binge watch some Star Wars. May the 4th be with you. Oh, and live deliberately.